Welcome back. Russian shelling has hurt at least 9 people in the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson late on Thursday as residents were being evacuated because of flooding caused by the destruction of the Shernikova Dam. The prosecutor general's office initially said 1 person had been killed by the Russian shelling, but later said no deaths had been reported. A witness in Kherson spoke of hearing what appeared to be artillery fire. Kherson lies on the Dnipro River, approximately 60 kilometers downstream from the Shernikova Dam. Russia has accused Ukrainian forces of shelling rescue workers in Russian-occupied parts of the Kherson region, and each side blames the other side for the destruction of the Shernikova hydroelectric station and dam.
We express our profound concern over the reported shelling of Kherson, Ukraine, during the evacuation from the areas flooded after the destruction of the dam of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power plant. According to the Kherson local authorities, at least 9 people, including police, medical and rescue personnel, were wounded today in the city as a result of shelling that occurred during the ongoing evacuation operation. We strongly condemn shellings of evacuation areas and call on the Russian Federation to cease such attacks and allow the evacuation teams to safely help the affected civilian population. We also urge the Russian Federation to grant full, safe and unimpeded access to the affected areas of the left bank of the Dnipro River, which are currently under its military control, for humanitarian actors, in particular those from the United Nations and ICRC, to help affected local residents.
Floodwaters unleashed by the destruction of the Shernikova Dam reached regional center Mykolaiv on Thursday. Water levels were rising quickly in the city, submerging homes and roads. It is not known how many people may have died as a result of the flooding, but the Russian-installed mayor of Nova Kakhovka, near where the dam is located, says at least 5 people have died, and the total death toll is sure to be much higher. Kherson's Ukrainian governor, Oleg Orlov, said 68% of the flooded territory was on the Russian-occupied left bank of the Dnipro River. A spokesperson for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, is describing the situation in Ukraine's Kherson as very difficult. Saviano Abro says this in connection to the bursted Shernikova Dam. According to Saviano, the consequences of the dam's destruction would have a long-term impact, potentially affecting agriculture in the region and residents' access to drinking water. Ukraine is a major global grain and oilseeds grower and exporter. The destruction of the dam has also made it impossible to navigate parts of the Dnipro River and deprived Kyiv of an important agricultural export route.
It's a very difficult situation for people in Kherson right now because they are already suffering the consequence of the war for a long time. So it's a new dimension of a situation that was already bad. The humanitarian needs in Kherson are high since the government of Ukraine retook control of the city in November last year. Hostilities didn't stop. Otherwise, it increased, actually, impacting people's ability to access the most basic services. Water is a challenge and has always been a challenge in Kherson. Electricity has been a challenge. Access to food is a challenge. So now the situation is only getting worse. And the coping strategies or coping mechanisms for this population is already really low. The extension of the flooding is massive and the water is still increasing. So we do know of people, particularly in areas that are now under Russian control, at least the image that we have seen and information that we gathered, that people are really stranded in areas completely flooded without any means to live. In the areas that are under Ukrainian control, people are trying to live, but they want to stay close to their homes. So most of the people that evacuated, we have more or less around 2,000 people that they had to leave their homes. The homes were flooded. They are trying to stay close. They are staying here. Some city in parts that are not flooded of the same city. the consequence of the disaster is not going to be seen. It's not going to stop when the waters recede. The impact is going to be long term. The agriculture is going to be impacted. As we all know, this area is heavily contaminated by mines and explosives. It has a consequence for this as well. Irrigation systems are broken. Water supplies, 700,000 people depends on water from the reservoir from Kakhovka. The level of the reservoir is dropping, so we are at risk of having 700,000 people that cannot have clean water at home. Food production, as I mentioned, is going to be for a long time, so the response is going to have to last for long as well.
Ukrainian soldiers have been using drones to deliver bottled water to desperate villagers trapped in the upper stories of their homes by floods in Russian-controlled South Ukraine. Drone flyers of the 406th Separate Artillery Brigade used the military drones for a peaceful purpose, dropping water bottles to people hanging out of their windows in the village of Oleshki in the Kherson region. In a video released earlier, trapped villagers waved frantically as drones flew overhead, dropping drinking water. A young boy waved and smiled after he caught one of the bottles. A rescuer described evacuees from the flood-stricken southern region of Kherson as exhausted and weak. 2 days after the destruction of a dam submerged villagers, fields, and roads. One volunteer named Mark said the floodwater was very polluted for drinking, but also dangerous if it came into contact with skin.
You see exhaustion, you see weak people who were evacuated and went through a very hard physical few hours, and they're exhausted. Their existing conditions speak out. Yeah, if we're talking about patients who are lying down and are being evacuated to the next spot with our ambulances because they cannot sit in a car, they cannot walk. The water is very polluted for drinking, but also for your skin, for any existing conditions, even for the wet clothes that the volunteers are going into these waters. They need to dry them in the sun because it can have serious effect on your health, on your skin.
The World Health Organization, WHO, has rushed emergency supplies to Ukraine after the breach of the Kakhovka Dam, which led to widespread flooding. Asked specifically about cholera, WHO technical officer Teresa Zakaria said the risk of an outbreak was present because the pathogen exists in the environment, adding that the WHO was working with Ukraine's health ministry to ensure that vaccines can be imported if needed. Britain is still seeking to establish what exactly caused the appalling destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam on the front line between Russia and Ukrainian forces. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said this during a visit to the United States. The major Soviet-era dam in the Russian-controlled part of southern Ukraine was breached on Tuesday, unleashing floodwaters across the war zone in what both Ukraine and Russia said was an intentional attack by the other forces. The British Prime Minister is in the United States hoping to build deeper economic ties with America. Sunak plans to speak to a U.S. President Joe Biden on artificial intelligence as Britain aims to host the first summit on the issue this autumn to discuss how the risks of AI can be mitigated through internationally coordinated action.
So we're still establishing definitively the cause of the attack on the dam in Ukraine, but I want people to know that we're playing our part to support the Ukrainians in their response. We provided resources to the United Nations and the Red Cross in advance, anticipating incidents like this. Those resources are now being moved into the region to help support those families affected. This is an appalling act, and hundreds of thousands of people are being affected by it. We'll continue to provide support for the Ukraine. I think the UK is well placed to take a leadership role in shaping the conversation about how we regulate AI so that we can enjoy its benefits, of which clearly there are many, but do so in a way that protects our countries and citizens and make sure it's used safely and securely. the UK's research-based companies, everything points to us having a leading role in this, and our ability to move quickly to put regulation in place is really important in an industry and technology that itself is changing very rapidly. I'll be discussing that with President Biden today. I'm delighted the US is supporting our summit, and I've also spoken to the companies involved about this when I convened them in Downing Street a few weeks ago. I think they're also keen to support the UK in helping to develop what needs to be a global architecture for regulation ultimately.
And the global regulator in the UK?
I think that we need to start the conversation about what the type of regulation we need is. The exact form that will take will be the type of topic that one would hope we can discuss. But it's important that we do put guardrails in place so we can enjoy the benefits of AI safely and securely. And as I said, the UK can play a leadership role on this. It's something I'm particularly interested in myself, and I think it will be to the benefit of our country.
U.S. President Joe Biden believes the United States will have the necessary funding to support Ukraine for as long as it takes as Russia continues its invasion. It remains to be seen whether it's time for a British Secretary General of NATO, adding that the organization's allies need to discuss candidates for the leadership role. Sunak, who had been expected to try to win Biden's backing for Defense Minister Ben Wallace's bid to become the next NATO chief.
Today, we also discussed our unwavering support for the people of Ukraine and who are defending themselves against the most brutal aggression we've seen in a long time at the hands of Russia and Putin. The UK and the United States, together with more than 50 partners, have committed historic levels of security assistance to Ukraine. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his strong leadership, contributing significant amounts of security assistance and training Ukrainian troops so they can effectively use the equipment and ammunition we've collectively provided them. In talks with the Ukrainians and particularly with Zelensky and our allies and partners on commitments to Ukraine, long-term security to deter future aggression after this war ends is a goal. And we're advancing this goal by providing them the support Ukraine needs now on the battlefield and helping them strengthen their military over the long term. The fact of the matter is that I believe we'll have the funding necessary to support Ukraine as long as it takes.
The UK is proud of our contribution, including providing tanks, long-range weapons, and training Ukrainian soldiers. But let no one doubt, US leadership and resources are the decisive contribution allowing the forces of democracy and freedom to prevail. We're lucky to have America's investment in European security, but we need to share the burden alongside you, which is why defence spending in the UK has been above the 2% NATO benchmark. It's on an increasing trajectory, and we would encourage other countries to follow the lead that the US and the UK set, because our security is collective.
Alongside flooding, Ukrainians also face the risk of mines moving following the destruction of the huge hydroelectric Kakhovka Dam on front lines between Russian and Ukrainian forces on Tuesday. A global research officer at Halo, Andrew Matthewson, said his team uncovered 5,000 mines in the Mykolaiv region in the last month alone, likely a fraction of the total amount of unexploded ordnances embedded in the area.
The immediate threat to us and our staff and civilians is the fact that mines might move, and that will lead to the need for us to resurvey these areas, remark them as minefields, and obviously reorganize ourselves in terms of how to approach the clearance problems. Beyond that, the mines might not only move, but they might also fluctuate in terms of the way they're laid, which poses another risk for our staff that they need to be prepared for once we're able to clear the mines. It's most of the southern reaches of the Mykolaiv Oblast where Halo is working, and obviously, so that's the northern bank of the Dnipro River and both sides of the Inhalets River, which feeds into the Dnipro from north to south. Comparable sizes is difficult to say, but probably about the size of Greater London, I think, is a good comparative area. Yeah, unfortunately, not a lot. So our teams are we're constantly monitoring this, both my team that's monitoring social media and satellite imagery, and our teams are on the ground monitoring the increased risk due to possible movement of landmines. In terms of civilians, it really is, being very vigilant, and it's obviously goes beyond just not stepping on it. It's not approaching anything that might seem dangerous, not engaging with it, and calling the state authorities in Ukraine and making them aware of that threat. It's basically impossible to give an estimate. I mean, the contamination is so massive. The conflict is ongoing. The size of Ukraine itself, the front line is 1,200 miles. Unfortunately, it's just really impossible to say. That could be 1%, could be 0.0001.
One of Russia's longest-serving and most respected human rights campaigners went on trial yesterday, facing the prospect of 3 years in jail if convicted of repeatedly discrediting Russia's armed forces. Since 1999, Oleg Orlov has been one of the leaders of Memorial, which won a share of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022, a year after being banned and dissolved in Russia. Since sending its tanks into Ukraine in February 2022, Moscow has intensified a long-running clampdown on all forms of political dissent and made it an offense to discredit the armed forces or deviate from government accounts. Sentences range up to 15 years in jail, although comments deemed to constitute treason, such as those for which opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza was jailed in April, can be punished by life imprisonment. Orlov, who came to prominence by opposing Soviet totalitarianism, told the independent Moscow Times last month that campaigners like him, to some extent, following the path of anti-communist dissidents of Cold War era. Orlov had already been fined for holding anti-war banners in public. The new charges are based on an article he wrote denouncing Russia for waging the conflict. Voice of America correspondent Anna Shernikova joins me now for more. Hi, Anna. Now, there's new information revealed that Russia is, in fact, responsible for the destruction of the dam. What else do we know now?
As we already discussed, and as everyone is discussing right now, it looks like the explosion was happening from the inside and inside of the dam, as it was mined. Since the beginning of its occupation and Russia taking control. So it looks like Russia will have to take this responsibility, at least. Again, we're waiting for additional official decisions by the international community. Again, in Ukraine, President Zelensky and Ukrainian officials have no doubts who is responsible for this, that Russia is the one who blew up the dam. And to be honest, for the moment, this is how it looks, again, as we discussed. So what's new happening is that evacuation is still ongoing. Unfortunately, Russian forces continue to shell the city of Kherson itself and Kherson region, which is under Ukrainian control. And this creates huge additional risks for people who already lost their homes under the water and who almost lost their lives. Some of them lost their lives. And additionally, during this evacuation, Russian forces is shelling civilians and particularly evacuation points. We know for the moment that more than 2,400 people have been evacuated from Kherson region. Also, more than 800 people have been evacuated from Mykolaiv region. Unfortunately, at least 5 people were confirmed dead. This includes, it was a very tragic also incident with a mother and 2 newborns, unfortunately not surviving the flood and just going under the water. And 13 people are considered considered missing. For the moment, we do not have total amount of injured and those who lost their homes, but we know that 48 settlements are currently under the water. And 34 out of this 48 are on the territory on the controlled territory by Ukraine.
And so what's the situation of the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia? Can you give us a bit of an update?
For the moment, well, again, let's start with the fact that the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant is at high risk, and we should not forget about this. We should not underestimate this risk because Kakhovka Dam was not only providing drinking and technical water for the region and well, basically enabling people to live in that area, but also it was a Kakhovka reservoir created particularly for the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant in order to cool down the nuclear part. For the moment, so in general, there are 6 nuclear parts in the plant. 5 for the moment are not operating. 1 is operating but not at full capacity. And for the moment, there is enough water for this 1 block, which is still operating at certain capacity. However, this situation could not last. So basically, International Atomic Energy Agency announced, well, stated that it should be also alternative ways of water supply to this cooling system. But again, it will be quite a problem because, again, the plant is under Russian control. Ukrainian authorities have no access to the plant. And for the moment, situation is controlled. But we are dealing with natural disaster, and no one can predict how this could change.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Anna, there has been continued shelling in the Kherson's flooded areas, as you obviously know, and even as people are being evacuated. Is Russia attempting to seize this vulnerable moment to retake Kherson?
No, it doesn't look like retaking Kherson because Russian forces are very far away, and because of the destruction of the dam and of the flooding, they had to move even farther away in order to save their lives, basically. Again, we have certain reports from Ukrainian authorities, let's say Ukrainian military. It's not, we cannot consider it as official statements, but we do hear that there is Russian forces movement farther from these territories at the left bank of Kherson region. Well, these shellings is just another crime because evacuation is happening. Civilians are trying to survive, to save their lives, their pets, their children, and people who lost everything. Most of those people who have to be evacuated, they lost all their lives, their houses, and Russian Federation unfortunately adds additional risks by shellings and shellings of the city center, shellings of the evacuation points, of the humanitarian points, and we know about, unfortunately, about victims and also a lot of injured that include rescue team members and medical personnel and volunteers who are helping people.
Well, Russia claims to have beaten back several major offensives in the last days, while Ukraine has once again denied it has already launched its counteroffensive. Now, how much strategy is there already in this mixed messaging?
We definitely see, and we already have even official statements by the Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine that Ukrainian forces indeed, she did not confirm that this is the beginning of counteroffensive, obviously, but she confirmed that certain active actions started at the Bakhmut direction and at the Zaporizhia direction. So we can assume that this could be possibly a part of this counteroffensive. But again, we cannot say for sure because according to Ukrainian officials, and President Zelensky was also saying this, that all the, all the confirmations or, not even confirmations, that everyone will understand when counteroffensive would actually be ongoing with the first results. So Ukrainian authorities do not want, as it looks from here, from Ukraine, do not want to announce anything in advance. This is understandable because this is military operation, and this is well, a very secure operation, so no one will definitely confirm anything in advance. But first results, if they are coming, this would be the confirmation. What we know for sure is that Ukrainian forces had certain advance at the Bakhmut direction, which is east front line, and also certain advance at the Zaporizhia direction, which is southeast front line. In terms of the battles, battles are extremely difficult. Heavy battles are ongoing. In some areas, Russian forces they have to defend, and they stay at their defense positions, and definitely they have certain success in this defense as well. Again, we don't have particular details, but what is confirmed, and this is really something like really little piece of information that we officially can comment from the official sources, that Ukrainian forces managed to advance at least around 1 kilometer, 1.2 kilometer in the east front line, and no details on the Zaporizhia direction, but also certain actions are happening.
All right. Thank you very much, Anna. That was Anna Shernikova, our Voice of America correspondent.